Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. I've been tossing up whether to do a post today, and then someone sent me an email and suggested there's a good reason why we should do a post today, and gave me the topic, which we'll be talking about in just a minute. But I've been wondering about, what does it mean to be an Australian on Australian Day? What does Australia Day mean in the first place? I personally don't do any celebrations. I'm usually locked away in my home because of Blink and COVID, and normally I don't think I do that much anyway. So what does it mean to be an Australian? What does it mean to have a day such as today? And when I started to reflect on it, I began to realise that probably not all that much, particularly not that much to me. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean something to you or to certain communities, but it doesn't mean anything to me because there's so many crappy things that we as a country do. Now, we have great weather generally. We have lots of resources. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, who knows? We have... That's all we have. And we have each other. And we generally treat each other pretty poorly, I think. And we've got a whole group of politicians that, well, if you're proud of them, good for you. But I'm not. I think Scott Morrison's an embarrassment. I think Anthony Albanese struggles to do anything that's productive. And I'm very disappointed in how we represent ourselves politically. And whether these people that are politicians actually represent us at all and aren't just focused on their own self-interests. So what I wanted to do is focus on the issue that has concerned me today, and that is about the impact that a day like today has on First Nation people. And what does that mean to them? So I'm not going to attempt at all to speak for First Nation people today. I'm going to read some articles where other people are voicing and some First Nation people are talking about the issues that do concern them. As a political party and as a party that focuses on the well-being of children, it is important to understand that what impacts us or what impacts me and our party is the way that we treat children. So there's probably no better day than today to talk about the horrific way we have treated kids in this country, particularly Indigenous children and Indigenous families. And so this is what I want my focus to be on with you today. If you wish to make any comments about this, please do so. If you happen to be watching any of this on YouTube, please subscribe as well. We'd be love to have you on board so you can get all future notifications. So I'm going to look at a few articles, and you can have a conversation with me, because one of the things that concerns me the most is that this issue around the way we're treating Indigenous kids and families is absolutely horrific, and that it seems to be pushed under the carpet because for some particular reason us white people seem to present as if we don't care about this issue. And I just want people to know that here at CPP we do care. We care for all kids, and particularly for Indigenous kids, because they are the most disadvantaged of them all. Them and also kids that are refugee kids as well, I think fit into the same category. But today, being Invasion Day, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kids. So I'm going to cite a number of newspaper articles and some studies that have been done around kids that are in care, Indigenous kids that particularly are in care, and how this system has failed them, continues to fail them, and has failed them forever. And I mean forever, since we invaded this country, since us white people, the imperialist bloody British, invaded this country. And so I'm going to point out some statistics to you, and I want us to start to think about what is it that you could ask us, that is the Child Protection Party, to do to help to address many of these issues that I'm going to highlight for you in just a moment. It is important to find ways to engage with, for us to engage with Indigenous communities so that we can come together and work towards developing policies that ensures that their families remain together. I'm going to start with this particular article, which is from the Australian Institute of Family Studies, and this kind of kicks off my discussion with you. It says here, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are overrepresented in child protection and out-of-home care services compared to non-Indigenous children. The reasons for this are complex. I hate it when I use the word complex, but that's the word they use, and are connected to past policies and the legacy of colonisation. Poverty, assimilation policies, intergenerational trauma, and discrimination and forced child removals have all contributed to the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in care, as has a lack of understanding of the cultural differences in child-rearing practices and family structures. That's from the Human Rights and Opportunities Commission. Now, one of the issues which seems to continually being raised around this is our lack of ability to be able to understand the cultural practices of Indigenous people, for us to believe that we as Westerners and the Western way of raising children is the only way. That is so untrue, and that we don't give any voice to cultural beliefs and cultural practices, which may seem antithetical, I guess, to us in the West, but which have been practiced for tens of thousands of years by Indigenous people and are successful in keeping those people together in terms of their culture, their beliefs, and their sense of community, and their sense of the way by which they parent, which works for their culture and their kids. So we tend to ignore all of that, don't pay any lip service to it whatsoever. We consider it completely void of any reason, and it's untrue. And we should be listening more and more to Indigenous people around these particular issues. So I just want to go to an ABC news item which says the proportion of Aboriginal children in state care in South Australia is at its highest level in at least 5 years and is continuing to grow at an alarming rate, a new report has revealed. This is a Guardian of Children and Young People report. 1 in 11 Aboriginal children were in state care in South Australia as of June 2020. Using predominantly commissioned data, it found the proportion have increased from 6.2% 5 years ago to 8.5% last year, compared to 0.7% for the non-Aboriginal population. And the rate of Aboriginal children and young people in detention is 22.7 times higher than non-Aboriginal children in South Australia, the report went to say. And here are the statistics. Aboriginal and Torres Strait 36.7 versus 63%, remembering that the Aboriginal community is only 3% of the population. So it is important, I think, for us to understand that there are people out there like the Guardian of the Children who are saying, well, look, these kids should not be locked up. It is a problem. We're having so many kids detained. We're having so many kids also in out-of-home care that are Indigenous children. Clearly there must be something wrong here with the system, and that we must find a way in order to rectify it. And I think part of the problem is that no one seems to be listening. No one seems to actually care. And it's about time we did, because there's so many issues in this country that in which we just pay lip service to, we don't seem to worry about until it affects us personally. But when it's about kids, unless, when we have kids placed on the front page because they've either been kidnapped or they've been murdered or they've died in suspicious circumstances, then we worry, then we show our concern. I think it's about time we all demonstrated some concern for the amount of kids that are placed in care and the damage that does to them for the rest of their lives, in fact. So I've got another report here, which is from the Sydney Herald, which is quite lengthy, but does says a lot of things that I've already said and really needs to be considered. And it says here the number of Indigenous children entering the child protection system could increase by more than 50%. This is alarming. Could increase by 50% over the next decade without wide-ranging structural reforms, despite new closing the gap commitments, according to Australia's peak body for First Nations people. This is December 9th last year, incidentally. The report also said current trends are deeply concerning, despite last year's historic national agreement on closing the gap, which included a commitment by all jurisdictions to reduce the rate of children in care by 45% in the next decade. The number of our children living in out-of-home care is projected to increase by 54% over the next decade if the current trajectory is not interrupted by profound and wholesale changes to the legislation, policy and practices. Now, I do need to say, though, that one of my big concerns has been that every year, in terms of kids being removed, it's around 7%. If that continues exponentially, we're going to wind up, for some reason, with most of our kids, white kids as well, everybody's kids, in care, unless we arrest this problem, unless we discover what we can actually do about resolving the problem of taking away any kid, but particularly about Indigenous kids, because they're being removed at alarming rates. So we're doing what they did back in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s by taking kids away and creating a stolen generation. We're just doing the same thing again. Modelling from the University of Sydney showed that if early intervention and prevention efforts could reduce the rate of entry to out-of-home care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children by just 5% per year, the Closing the Gap target to reduce overrepresentation by 45% by 2031 can be met. This report is heartbreaking and distressing, and it really points to the fact that we do have a human rights crisis on our hands in this country. When you grow up in out-of-home care, your outcomes are likely to be poor at many, many levels. And we at CPP have been talking about that for years, that if you're going to go out-of-home care, chances of a successful life are pretty minimal because of all the crap and the trauma and everything that you've been through and being removed from your family. For Indigenous kids, those numbers are even greater. What chance do some of those kids have of having a decent life when they have to face all the racism and prejudice and everything else they have to face just by being black, and then they have been in a system which doesn't give them the opportunity to be the people that they need to be self-confident and reliable individuals. They just haven't had that opportunity. Now, the final article I want to look at and read to you is also highlights some of these areas, and it does lend its voice to some Aboriginal people, so it's important to hear this particular article as well. The number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children being removed from homes and placed into Australian child protection system and staying there permanently is increasing at a staggering rate, according to this report, which is similar to the report I just quoted. The Family Matters report, released by Secretary of National Aboriginal and Torres Strait and Aboriginal and Islander Child Care, that's SNAIC, Indigenous children were in out-of-home care of June 2021, this was, which represents 1 in every 15.6 First National children living in Australia. That is horrific, absolutely horrific. It also found 79%, about 17,000 children, lived permanently away from their birth parents, with less than 15% reunified with their families. The Wiradjuri man and Family Matters co-chair Paul Gray said the figures were getting worse for our kids. They are sadly almost becoming the majority of children out of home care, and I think that should give us significant pause and a heck of a lot of concern, I say. It should be of deep concern to everyone, the experiences and these statistics that we're seeing nationally, but also the sorts of responses that we're seeing from government. The number of our children living in out-of-home care is projected to increase by 54% over the next decade if the current trajectory is not interrupted by profound and wholesale changes to legislation, policy and practices. And I read that out earlier. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children make up about 6% of all children in Australia, but represent 39% of all kids in out-of-home care. Our kids are overrepresented at every step of this system, but also that overrepresentation grows as we move through the system. These systems are fundamentally failing our kids, and they need to be transformed if they are going to do better. The report calls for greater investment in Indigenous-led solutions that supports early intervention and prevention, and for a National Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island children and young people. About 84% of child protection funding is spent on intervention and out-of-home care. That is, it's not dealing necessarily always with the problem. Just 16% is invested in families. As I said, just 16% is invested in families and supporting families. So I hope I've made the point quite clear that the reality is that we are doing very little about a problem where the statistics are indicating to us that it is in dire straits and that something needs to be done about it. And even though we've had all these reports and, bridging the gap stuff, and we've done a whole lot of other stuff over the years, for some reason we're still not getting it. We're still removing kids at greater numbers. And one of the reasons for that is that we have a system, a governmental system, a professional system that doesn't care enough about children to actually be doing anything about it. And I've got, just wanted to have a look. Some people, it's glad to see that we've got so many people on board. Beautiful. I hope you have I don't know whether to say, look, Australia Day's a holiday, but if you're thinking about Australia Day, don't think about all the great things you might have. Think about all the things that those that aren't as fortunate as you may have, and particularly kids that are in care, or kids that just aren't able to be with their parents, and families that just aren't able to spend the time. Trish says, it's a global happening, not actually any specific country. Please remember the 5G at play and so quiet surrounding everything. I don't know what that refers to, actually, Trish. Our children are being sexualised in nurseries from age 1 year and upward without parents' consent. You're probably not wrong, Stephen. If Black lives really matter in Australia, yes, thanks, Clinton, for saying that. That's important. Child protection system would be reformed to stop Aboriginal children from being removed from family. That's so true. So join in, make some comments, and if later on I'll get to those comments, and if you need me to respond, please do. And I also need to say that if you would like to support the Child Protection Party, please do. We have a state election coming up. For a voice around some of these issues, and I noticed that Adam Brandt sent something out earlier on a tweet or a Facebook post talking about Aboriginal issues as well, and it's Invasion Day. And I commend Adam for that. But if you want a voice specifically for kids in our society that talk about not just Indigenous problems, which is extreme, but also the problems in relation to kids not having a voice generally, we do ask you to consider perhaps donating to CPP as well, so that we can do the things that we need to do. Unfortunately, without the funding, it will be difficult for us to even run a couple of candidates in the next state election. We want to be able to have these candidates right around Australia. So please do what you can and donate to us now. Thanks for being with me today. We'd like to think that you could add some more comments to this if you wish. Please do so, and if you're on YouTube, we will get back to you and respond to any of the comments you make there as well. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care. Where possible, have a good day and be safe.